Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. It's been a bit of a struggle to get cannabis dispensaries licensed and opened in the Bronx, but the news came down recently that there is one that just opened on East Tremont Avenue, just west of Southern Boulevard. And there are plans to have dispensaries opened, Mott Haven, Pelham Bay, on Williamsbridge Road. There's one in Parkchester, and I'm sure people have plans for other places. So tonight we're going to talk with the general manager of that first facility in the Bronx and also get an overview of where we are from someone who's been on top of this game from the beginning. So please join me in welcoming in our studio the general manager of Statis, Brandon Bianco. Nice to have you, Mr. Bianco.
Hi, thank you. Nice to be here.
And on Skype, all the way wherever she is, from CannaBronx, our buddy Kavita PAwria-Sanchez. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Sanchez.
Thanks for having me.
Great. We'll get to you in a moment. I want to start with, I guess, a very happy guy. Mr. Bianco, let's just talk about Statis. You worked in the cannabis industry in California and Arizona and now the Bronx. Why did it happen? How did it happen? What's the plan? Where are we at?
So my history, it's always been about getting to New York. I've been
like everybody else in the world in every other industry.
Yep. And New York opening up recreational dispensaries was my sign that the cannabis industry has really gotten there. Started on the West Coast, spanned all the way to the East Coast now. And, you know, there's so many people you can help that 10, 15 years ago would have never looked for cannabis to help them in any way. And now they're able to come through the doors at our store in the Bronx, and we're able to consult with them, some of which coming with no knowledge outside of maybe the 1970s. And the industry has grown so much from then, becoming just regulated and taxed. And it's amazing what we can do for these communities who are historically underserved.
Underserved, and also, of course, the objective is to get people who have been impacted by cannabis-related convictions. Talk a little bit about that as regards Statis, because you're not the only person who's involved in, kind of managing it. And of course, we want to get a status update. That was, by the way, it's STATIS, not STATUS, but we want to get a STATUS update on how they're doing. But just talk a little bit about, you talked about helping people. Talk about that notion of relieving a burden that had been on a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, to be truthful, there's been people using cannabis in that area for so long. And there's no real way to know where it's coming from, no test results. Everything that we could do to actually have a legitimate product for them so they can feel just as safe as if they're going into any grocery store or pharmacy to buy products that have test results there that you can feel safe purchasing. Mm-hmm.
There were pictures there of the opening. The opening was well attended. I mean, very well attended. There was a lot of enthusiasm. We were talking about it beforehand, and I had spoken to somebody who said, you know, it's interesting because the people in that neighborhood are not coming in, but it's people either from other neighborhoods or even outside. Why do you think that is? One would think that this would be kind of a relief to people and say, wow, look what's like any other store that we could shop in our neighborhood. How do you see that?
I mean, honestly, to me, it's an issue of trust, and it's something that's our number one priority to build up with the community. A lot of people who have been using cannabis for long periods of time they have this person they go to, or they have a store, which aren't licensed, aren't legal, but still they trust them, and they've done this for maybe decades. So we've been open for 3 weeks, and we are getting trickles of people, and and many of them are already returning customers. It's amazing to see, and it's just with our customer service and our higher quality of product, it's something that we will continue to grow our customer base as we grow with the community.
Did New York make it easy, or New York State make it easy or hard? Was it similar to the processes in the other places you were in California and Arizona? Just where do we stand, so to speak?
Yeah, one of the big differences in New York compared to the others is that California and Arizona, they essentially, when they switched from medical to recreational, they made most of the medical facilities recreational as well. Whereas in New York, they're starting all new stores, and the medical market is staying the same.
I see. That's fascinating. What about the licensing process? And that's when we're going to bring Ms. Sanchez in, because she knows a lot about that as well.
Yeah, the licensing process is one that, honestly, it's my favorite that I've seen of
Really?
any state I've been in.
And put a check mark next to us here in New York. Then.
I mean, the idea that it's social justice people getting the license, they're going to be the 51% owners of any dispensary right now that's given a license. And it's someone who's been negatively affected by the war on drugs. So many other states that have opened up, the people who really benefit are MSOs, multi-state organizations. Whereas here, it's New Yorkers benefiting. It's people that have had injustices done to them, and it's a little way to give back to a market that, in some ways, they helped build.
And so that's interesting, especially coming from someone who knows the other states. And so that objective, at least, is being attempted at. Ms. PAwria-Sanchez, let's turn to you and talk a little bit about where we are at right now. One of the things I had heard was that New York State has a lot of people licensed. I think I saw something like 400 people licensed. We certainly don't have 400 dispensaries. Where are we at, and how is the state doing?
Sure. So to that point, yes, the state has licensed nearly 500 what are called card or conditional use recreational stores. Most of them are not open because those license holders have not had the support that they needed in order to get set up. So they haven't had capital, they haven't had sufficient technical assistance, or really many services or support from the state itself. And that is really challenging, right? Cannabis is a really capital heavy business. It is a very challenging business. The regulations are not easy, and people, especially folks who were impacted by the war on drugs, need an immense amount of support in order to be successful. In this past legislative cycle, nothing useful passed as it relates to cannabis, either for cultivators or for stores or for potential applicants. In the budget itself, there was $0 for technical assistance, $0 for capital. There's one exception, which is the state was finally able to raise $150 million to help only card licensees, which is great. And yet, the general licensing process for everybody else and all of the other license types, from cultivation to processing to delivery, etc., those license types, which are the vast majority, they're opening in October, which is very exciting for many folks, but there continues to be no technical assistance or state funding available to support those folks. And that is similar, a little bit better on the city side. On the city side, Cannabis NYC has been, which is located within the New York City Small Business Services, they've been doing an incredible job of getting community members educated, and they were able to work with New York City's EDC, the Economic Development Corporation, and they've announced a $8 million loan fund for New York City entrepreneurs.
Let me just. I want to ask you about it. I smiled when you said that, because the question is, to me, if you are somebody who is a license holder, but you don't have the resources, I mean, it's like saying to anybody, open a store. And then they've got to find a location, they've got to deal with a landlord, they've got to do all those kinds of things to get themselves set up. And a lot of that could be funding and all kinds of other things. So you're saying the city has an $8 million fund? That sounds like it would work out. And then what does it matter what the state does? I mean, I'm being very naive about it.
Yep, they've announced it. It won't be available, in my estimate, for about a year, because they have to find a provider to actually service those loans. And $8 million, when you crunch the numbers, really just scratches the surface. And so the hope here is that the state can come in and do more. And I think they will once the tax revenue is flowing. But that is going to be a couple of years out that they're in a position to do that. And in the meantime, folks who have the funds and resources, supports, technical assistance, lawyers, all of that, can get in early. And we do know that folks who get in early have an advantage.
Have a chance.
It is disconcerting.
Mr. Bianco, the news stories that came out said that you and your folks at Statis weren't sure about staying at that location. I don't know if you have plans, but is that wrapped up in what we just heard from Ms. PAwria-Sanchez?
A little bit, because the city, their DASNY fund is who helped us with a lot of services, gave us recommendations on things like the point of sale, the construction workers that worked on our current location had done other first run locations for the other, most of the other dispensaries in the city. Like the walls that are in our location, the fake ones
put all
up.
that stuff up.
Yeah, and those came from a different dispensary. Like they had a couple stickers we had to remove on it. So we did get assistance and help in certain ways there, recommendations on security companies and things where they had already dealt with it. So, I mean, I hope the rollout of that is quicker for other dispensaries.
We hear, and we just heard that it is a bit of a challenge. So what is the status? Are you going to stay there? Do you not know? I mean, you can just be honest with us. Do you not know? Or do you think this is good for now and we are going to move? Or how do you, or maybe stay there and then open another location if you found it, as long as the numbers work.
Yeah, the process hasn't been codified yet, but every licensee is supposed to be able to open 3 dispensaries. So we do have a hope to be able to expand to another location in the Bronx while being able to serve this community as long as we see the support that looks like it's there.
Mm-hmm. Ms. PAwria-Sanchez, back to you. We had you on sometime in the spring. I think it was in April. At that time, we talked about the illegal shops. The mayor has said there are more than 1,500 of them in the city, and they, I guess, serve to be competitors to those who are doing legal dispensing. The state, in their legislation, came up with a little more teeth to be able to close some of those shops. Where are we at as far as the illegal shops, which, and I will tell people, try not to do that because you don't know what you're getting. You're feeding an illegal market. I mean, it's just a lot of reasons not to do it. But just where are we at as far as those illegal shops go?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you both know that with the illicit market, the legal market cannot succeed. And of course, there are all kinds of issues with those shops being open, from the access that kids are getting to the quality of the product, et cetera. And so, yes, the city and state have really stepped up their enforcement. It is my understanding that they have already seized $1 million in product, with that number going up on a weekly basis. And they have really stepped up the fines and basically their enforcement authority and the repercussions for these business owners who have set up these shops. Now, I don't know that the city and state currently have the resources to do this work at scale. And so I think it will be very slow going, and it remains to see how quickly and how effectively this process can go. But the hope is that it does go well. And I think what I would say about that is we also don't want to recriminalize folks,
that's a very interesting point in light of this whole project.
Exactly. And so the gold standard here would be supporting those business owners, assuming they're legitimate and positioned to get licenses, to get them on that track and support them in doing so. You know, it's like, you want to do this, here's how you become legal in doing it.
There are many so-called smoke shops. And, if you go in there and maybe they sell paraphernalia and, other items that are not illegal, I've been trying to think this out. You basically would need to, do kind of like a regular drug sting and have somebody make a purchase and go in there. And that while maybe the law backs it up, that makes it a difficult process because from the law enforcement point of view, they really got to deal with that, right? I mean that's an issue. Mr. Bianco, we were talking about that beforehand. You said that there's part of you believes that it can coexist with a black market. What are your thoughts about the competition you might be receiving from people who open up a smoke shop and the next thing you know, they're selling inferior product or contaminated product? Who knows?
I mean, I will say the experience I've had in New York is a lot different than Arizona and California.
Really?
Based off of, there was still a black market. I don't think there's a single state that doesn't have at least a small black market. But being in as many stores and such that are here is something that took me by surprise. A lot of my staff and other people I've talked to had places they went that they were dead sure were legal. They had no idea.
They had no idea.
Yep.
Because they had heard that cannabis was legal, they saw a store opened up and said, "Oh wow, here's a place that I can now go."
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Yep. So part of it's just educating people, because a lot of people, I do believe, want to go to the licensed recreational shops where they know what they're buying. So educating people and trying to get them over with great customer service and things of that nature. That's what I'm focused on, because it's not for me to shut down shops, but it is for me to have a successful business and serve the community.
I want to just address that. You and I talked about it just before the program, and it's something that a lot of people probably don't think about, and that is the notion of jobs. And you told me that you didn't just bring in anybody to go work. Talk about the hiring process and the people who are there and the employment that you're providing for young people.
Yeah, I looked through over 100 resumes. We got over 1,000, but 100 of them were interviewed for me to choose about 20 of our original employees. And it's a team that I couldn't be more proud of. Anyone who goes
Bronx people, we'd like to think.
There's a good amount of Bronx people. It's a great every demographic's kind of felt. It's a very New York crowd for sure. And it's one that anybody who goes into that store is going to feel like this is probably the best customer service I have had in months.
I'm going to ask both of you this. We'll start with you, Mr. Bianco. Let's just talk about, because I asked this question in the fall to other people who are working in the industry. What is the effect to the city, to the neighborhoods, of people now having access to cannabis? There are many people say, well, now they're sitting in front of the building smoking weed or walking down the block. Of course, it is illegal to drive, so you certainly don't want people in cars like that. But what is the effect of it? I mean, there are many people who say, we don't want this in our neighborhood. What is the effect of it, or have you seen effect of it in the neighborhood where you are over there, on Southern Boulevard? Or just give me a sense of what you think the effect of this will be? And then Ms. PAwria-Sanchez, we're going to ask you the same question.
I think one of the biggest effects is safety on multiple fronts. One, that's an extra security guard or two that's on that street. That's always outside during the open hours. That brings a little bit more security to it. Also more cameras, because we are state mandated. We have to have cameras in the building, in front of the building. Different ways that actually help the safety of the community around us. And outside of that, it's just safety in the product, knowing what you're getting, all of that. It's just health reasons and physical.
Ms. PAwria-Sanchez, let's say you can't smoke cannabis in any place where it's illegal to smoke cigarettes, which includes public parks, restaurants, bars, and the subway. You are quite familiar with culture in the Bronx. If we have more stores, more places like Statis, more dispensaries, are neighborhoods going to change in some way? The response I got the last time I asked this question was no, it's going to be the same city. People will just have an additional recreational concept.
I think that's right. Right. If you think about alcohol and prohibition, we're in this fascinating moment where it's astounding, right, to walk around the streets and smell cannabis and see it openly. And we're experiencing a culture shift. There's still, of course, a ton of stigma associated with cannabis, which means education really needs to happen, and that has been lacking at the community level around, the medicinal properties, around how it's been decriminalized and why, and the benefits to our communities. And so on the flip side, I think the impact will be a tremendous amount of opportunity. Brandon spoke about jobs. The state estimates that 50 to 60,000 jobs will be created statewide. We think we can bring many of those to the Bronx. Obviously, there will be licensing opportunities. And CannaBronx is working to build a supply chain from seed to sale of entrepreneurs who are just as impacted in the Bronx. And so, while we see the culture will shift slowly, and part of that is not just breaking out of the stigma in the ways that, I think the parallel for alcohol is very real, but also the opportunity for reparations, for healing, and for community wealth generation for our communities that this tremendous law has brought.
Are we, you mentioned the comparison, and we may have had this discussion the last time you were here as well. Are we ever going to see cannabis bars in New York the way the bars serve alcohol? Because now you're not allowed to smoke weed in a restaurant or a bar, but do you think there will be licensed places where much like people could drink, those kinds of things for cannabis?
Yes, there is an official license coming out for what the state calls consumption lounges. And we do, the OCM, the Office of Cannabis Management, has indicated that dispensaries will actually be allowed to have a certain portion of their shops that can be used as essentially smoking lounges. So yes, that is happening.
Are you concerned? I mean, this is going to come up in every neighborhood where a dispensary is cited. Are you concerned about people underage smoking weed, kids getting high before? I mean, it's always been that way, I suppose, on some level. But kids getting high on their way to school and compromising their ability to achieve?
Absolutely. As a parent myself, it is of great concern, and we do need to do a tremendous amount of education on this front. Of course, kids are going to smoke, but when it becomes a habit, we know that there are developmental impacts on adolescents of using weed on a regular basis, not to mention other issues, that stem from regular use for young people in general. So yes, it's a challenge, and it's one that we need to take on in the way that we've taken on other issues with young people, right? From alcohol to sex to mental health to social media use to vaping, all kinds of challenges. And so we need to really tackle that head on.
Mr. Bianco, your thoughts about that? I mean, that you're providing a product, gets into the wrong hands. Obviously, you work very hard to make sure nobody's underage who comes through the doors. They do that in bars as well, but we know that kids somehow come away with it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, anything we can do to make that not accidentally happen is important. Our packaging is all child-proof. We're starting to get into programs and be able to offer more things to keep product away from children, because that is a huge issue. But the one thing that I always remind myself that gives me a little bit more security with kids is I've never heard of a dealer that cards, and we have to card.
And you have to cards. You know, and I was going to ask that in relation to the question about bars, is that I'm guessing that if there is a safe place, so to speak, like a bar, so to speak, for cannabis, that there will be more security that you get in your local establishment, that people go in and drink it. Right? I mean, I think that's going to happen. Right?
Absolutely.
That they'll check people for age. They'll make sure that there's a legitimate security guard by law, as opposed to, well, we have a bouncer out front, that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm guessing that's what's going to happen.
Absolutely. Someone once told me that while I think I'm working in cannabis, I'm really working in the compliance industry. Part of that is making sure no one under 21 gets into a consumption lounge or our dispensary, because that's the way to stay open and that's the right thing to do. But we have multiple verification checks to make sure that we don't have underage sales, just the way it should be.
Mm-hmm. Let's just to wrap up. What's next? I mean, we're going to obviously keep trying to promote the product and have people walk in the store and make purchases. Larger picture, you think you would get into something like an establishment that's a cannabis safe place, or how do you just see the future of what Statis is going to work on?
Yeah, it is our hope that they open up the three licenses that we have. And if we can do that, it's definitely in our plans to create.
You have 3 licenses?
Yes,
wow.
In the Bronx. The one license comes with 3. They just don't have a mechanism to get the other 2 open yet. But it's in our mind to have at least one more location, and that would include a separate consumption lounge. Because
just like we just heard from Ms. PAwria-Sanchez.
Exactly. Following those same laws, we hope to be able to serve the community, not just be able to get their product, but have a safe place to use it.
Ms. PAwria-Sanchez, what's the top on your list from either a legislative point of view or a societal point of view? What do you see as next?
Sure. So absolutely a lot of advocacy for years to come in terms of making sure the state and the city are doing everything they can to make sure that this rollout is fair and really serves the community in the way it was meant to. We have a ton of community education to do, as I mentioned. And first and foremost, and the thing I'm most hopeful about is we're starting to get people ready to apply for licenses, and there's tremendous hope and opportunity in that. People are excited. They're cautious because they know that the industry is a very difficult one. The market is volatile.
I don't want to cut you off, but we got to run. Kavita PAwria-Sanchez, thank you so much. We'll keep on talking with you because we got to know what's going on. It's very important.
Thank you.
And thank you, Brandon Bianco. Good luck with Statis. And I guess that will do it. We thank our producer, Rebecca Hemick. Our director is Nick Marrero. And we'll see you next week. Good night.